Okay, wow, we've got a lot of people joining. This is excellent. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone. For those of you that I have not met, my name is Elizabeth Shea. I'm the president of REQ, and I assume that many of you know who REQ is, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But in the event that you don't, REQ is a full-service marketing and PR firm. We're actually based in Washington, D.C., as we were just talking about earlier. It's a quite balmy day today, so we're going to get started inside on this webinar on on messaging in a changing landscape. So I'm really excited to have a couple of our panelists here today that are from the REQ content team. One of the reasons that we started this program and thought about this program is a lot of our clients now have been asking, how do I change or shift my messaging? Should I change or shift my messaging? And so we've really gathered together as a team to look at what's working, what's not working, and we thought we'd put it into webinar format. And I'm very excited that we've put a lot of thought into how to provide some tips and tricks, things that are going to potentially resonate for you and your company. So I'm going to go ahead and, without further ado, introduce our panelists. Amanda, can we start with you?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. My name is Amanda Wilson. I'm the Associate Director of Content here at REQ. I sit on the creative team, and I've been with REQ for 7 years. Before that, I worked as a copywriter with Bloomberg Industry Group, also on the creative team for 3 years. Here at REQ, I work with a lot of different teams, from the public relations team to advertising. And what I love about working on messaging for clients is just how it challenges us each day to put the message into different formats, whether that's a video script or an ad that's 150 characters. I really love that. And some of my favorite campaigns have been climate technology, healthcare, for example, and road safety. And when I tell people what messaging is, it is not only describing a product or a service, but going beyond that to help people imagine a world and what the world can be. So on the campaigns that I've worked on, for example, it's helping people imagine what that means to get home safely, or what it means when your family member is healthy and can enjoy memories together. So I think that messaging is both describing and helping people imagine. That's what I love about this work. So with that, I'll just pass it to Jackson.
Thanks so much, Amanda. I always love hearing you talk about messaging in such an inspirational way. It's like
I know, it's
it
very
inspires
inspiring.
me.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm a brand strategist and content strategist here at REQ. I've been with the company for a little over 10 years. And what I love, similarly to Amanda, I just love, helping brands capture the emotion and the human connection through kind of the power of storytelling. I've always loved stories ever since a young age. I was an avid reader. I always was consuming content. Even as a young kid, I would spend hours in the basement by myself with my Legos and my Playmobil, like setting up these elaborate stories with, detailed characters and these sort of rising and falling action in the grand finale. And just, I was, obsessed with stories. I joined REQ back in 2015, as I mentioned, and I started out as a copywriter. And I was really helping, some of our clients, from the world's largest tech companies to local restaurants to financial institutions and advocacy groups and everything in between. Not always, the most exciting content, but I loved finding ways to find that engagement and, the compelling story that exists within every company. For instance, we have a financial firm that invests in underserved communities, and we helped them, really build their brand and messaging around the promise of growth, growth for small businesses, and the promise of progress and growth with renewable energy and affordable housing. And so we were able, and I was very proud of this, to use message to position them as champions for the underdog. These, people who are willing to fight for them and get their hands dirty and support them to create real change. So crafting messaging and, telling those stories is really a highlight of what we do here.
That's so cool. My brother and my nephew both played Legos at home, and my brother is now in the content field as well. So that's amazing. There's a correlation, apparently. I never thought of
I'm
that.
sure there is, yeah.
All right, so just a couple of housekeeping items. We are going to do a couple of polls, and I think we're going to flash one up now. So if you don't mind quickly answering, is the poll up there, Maria? I can't tell. There we go. Okay, perfect. Just a quick couple polls so we get a sense for who's here, who's present. Also, in the event that you have a question, please feel free to put it into the chat. And hopefully, if I don't personally see it, I will be monitoring. If I don't personally see it, Maria will raise her hand and we'll take a look at that. And very exciting. So we'll give this another minute. We've got 18 out of, okay, we've got a lot of people participating. Wow, we got a lot of people in marketing and creative, someone in sales, terrific. Wow, well, you're in the right place. That's fantastic. Okay. All right, we can close that one out then. And then I think we had one other poll that we wanted to put up. Am I right, Maria? Okay, while we're waiting for the poll to come up, Amanda, maybe you can share with us what we plan to talk about today. Kind of give us the highlights of what you want to go through today. And then we
Sure,
can
we'll talk about creating the foundations of a brand messaging platform, what goes into that. I think that'll be interesting for our audience to kind of see if they have those same elements as well with their team. Then we'll go on to kind of questions around evolving the messaging in today's landscape. And finally, how we measure impact and know that messaging is working. And of course, no discussion of messaging would be complete without chatting about AI, even for just a few minutes.
Well, so that brings me to, I guess, the part that I started to allude to earlier, the why now. Like what is so important about messaging today? What are you seeing that makes it important today? And what are the key tenets that you're seeing from a messaging
Yeah, I'll take that one, and thanks for
Okay.
asking that. It's I think messaging is always important, especially today, but it's always essential. And sometimes clients will say, why do we have to care about messaging? We want to focus on the look and feel of the creative that we want to focus on the tactics. But to us, messaging is so essential. It's really the clearest way that brands can communicate who they are, what their vision is, what they believe in, what matters to them. It gives them kind of a touchstone, or it gives their audiences a touchstone, or like a North Star to think about and reach for. And also, messaging is not just external, even though it's often thought about externally, messaging to clients, to customers, but it also serves an internal purpose. It can give a rallying cry. It can make people proud of a place that they work for. They find shared values through messaging that their organization might send out. So, again, why now is, I think there's a lot of external factors. Amanda mentioned AI in the intro, but, there might be political factors or things like that too. We have a few clients in the B2G space and the advocacy spaces who they had to kind of shift their messaging a little bit earlier in the year with the new administration. And what we advised them to do and what we helped them do is find ways to remain true to themselves and not necessarily alienate their audiences in any way, but staying authentic to who their brand is and making sure that remains consistent, even as they slightly nuance their messaging for the new times. An example of that not going well, for instance, in the larger sphere is if we look at what happened with Target this year. So they rolled back their DEI initiatives, which they were praised for over the previous few years, resulting in this tremendous backlash, these boycotts. And because their messaging and their actions didn't really align with who their audiences, of what their audiences expected them to be doing, they ended up losing, I think, I have it here, 12 billion in market share, and $27, their stock dropped by $27 per share. And it shows you, messaging has real world consequences. It's actually measurable. So the next time somebody says, why are we focusing on messaging? It's an afterthought. I think that there's actually real world consequences that we can measure.
That is so true. And we've seen a lot. I think that's part of the inspiration for this webinar in general. And you kind of speak to the words that might be used, or it might not even just be the actions people are taking, but it's the words. And so maybe Amanda, you could take us through your thoughts on how the words matter, why words matter, and when it's right to use certain words or not use certain words. Because that's what people are asking us that. Well, do I need to change some of the words I'm using? And maybe it's not about the words, but can you comment on that topic of the words?
Yeah, I think about this as a lot as a writer and someone who loves language, but I think it's just so important to kind of go back to this idea that messaging is a framework. As Jackson mentioned, it's like a North Star. So I don't know if any of you have ever been sailing, but I started sailing a couple of years ago through a nonprofit here in DC. And I just love kind of the sailboat as a metaphor for messaging. Like, for example, you have the tiller, you have the mainsail, the jib. And of course, the most important is having your point of sail, which is where you're going. That's where you want to harness all of these tools that you have and move in that direction. And so that's like messaging. You have your mission, your vision, your values, things that what you believe and what your team believes. And that is your point of sale. And so all of these things have to work together. And you can pivot language, but as long as you cannot let go of the tiller, for example, or everything, your boat will go off track. And your audience knows if you're kind of out of control, if you've lost control of your message. So I would just say that think more about uh, your messaging platform, making sure that is solid and you know where you're going. And then the language shouldn't be a question anymore. Use
Right.
avoid jargon, use conversational language. I mean, I think that we really have to follow these tenets as well. But yeah, messaging is your North Star.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That's amazing. So
Can you tell we're storytellers, Elizabeth? We
I know,
like
I
to
was gonna say, I haven't even heard these stories before, so this talk about authentic, right? Um, so you talk about authenticity, you talk about potentially telling stories in the form of potentially parables or metaphors. Um, I've also heard you say just in other conversation with clients that you talk a lot about trust and that a messaging platform is about building trust. Can you talk a little bit about um, how the messaging platform parlays into that trust and why trust is so important, especially since you
Yeah.
talked about Target the other day, because that was a really big deal.
Mhm.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it would be one thing. It would be, you know, great if we could just like write the messaging, throw it out in the world and say, all right, here it is. Let's see how it performs. But in reality, of course, there's so much research and back end work that goes into it to create a messaging platform. I think the most important piece in a lot of marketing, but especially with messaging, is defining who your primary audience is. So it really begins with that audience and crafting a key message to them. Because broad messaging, it just feels, it's for one size fits all for anybody. It's impersonal. It doesn't really resonate. So defining that audience is incredibly important. Another piece of kind of the back end research that we like to do is to define what your goal is. At REQ, we call them moonshots, whether it's raising money or advocating for a cause or becoming a thought leader or recruiting talent, whatever it might be that goal is, we definitely want to make sure that our messaging is nuanced enough to fulfill that goal and speak to that audience. So those kind of play hand in hand. One of the last factors that goes into that too is looking at the competitive landscape. So if we can find any white space to differentiate and make sure that we are saying things differently than the competition, not too differently where we're completely out of the space that we want to be in, but differently enough where we can differentiate, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So those research pieces at the front end really help us define where the messaging is going to go. I think the last sort of really important part of that is collaboration, both internally and externally with our clients. So collaboration internally, we have an amazing team at REQ of copywriters, content strategists, creatives, brand strategists, like you name it. Everyone brings a very unique perspective to the conversation. Oftentimes, just speaking with a colleague who's passionate about something opens your mind to how they might view a topic, and we can weave that in when crafting messaging. And then also making sure we're collaborative with the clients because they're really the subject matter experts. So their expertise is so important to helping us craft the messaging, like having that insider information. So really, like if you can use that research, those insights, those real conversations to defend your choices when it comes to messaging, that's how you end up
Mhm.
with really powerful, effective messaging.
No, that's a very good point. I know we'll be touching on testing later and testing that messaging platform. I do want to think about just to kind of go back a little bit to the words and the impact that those words have as part of this process. Because as you define, as you go through this process, which is very well laid out, how do you be thinking about trust and impact along the way?
Hmm.
Can you touch on that, Amanda? Like, talk about impact and what you mean, what you would suggest impact, how impact parlays into this process.
Yeah, so once you've gone through those steps that Jackson mentioned, identifying the audience, finding the white space, collaboration, then you're ready to kind of launch your messaging. It's really important to first just test it a little bit with your team internally. Maybe you could use like a message testing platform that we use here, even focus groups, for example. I'm a huge fan of polls and surveys just to kind of get a pulse check on how are people responding to this in our audience and getting that real quantitative and qualitative feedback so that you have that in hand when you're ready to launch. There's not going to be any surprises. And then when your message is out there, and once you've kind of acculturized your team to the message as well, just kind of ask people, can they describe the product or the value in one sentence? I love that as kind of a metric. And also just the performance indicators. Are people signing up? Are they showing up? I love how the PR team is constantly measuring impact. I remember being in my first kickoff call with a PR team client, and our team just took out a spreadsheet and said, we've got the tracker covered. And the client was so relieved just to know that we had an eye on that impact in the market. The number of press releases, or the number of articles published, how people were mentioning it online, for example. So I love working with that team.
That's so cool. Well, just to take a quick administrative break for about halfway, a little bit into the program. If you're just joining us recently, we have Amanda Wilson and Jackson Bowers here from the REQ PR team or REQ content team. And then we have one more poll, I believe, if you want to pull that up, Maria. Before we go, we want to talk through a little bit about what people might be looking to gain today. Because in the event that you have a question, please feel free to put it into the chat. We'll keep monitoring that to a certain extent. But we're really looking for, what do you hope to take away today so we can address some of the really important points that are on people's mind. So how to differentiate your messaging, how to reach a specific audience. Do you maybe have the need to convey a specific value proposition? Just curious. We love those just curious people because you're dabbling. And maybe you were a storyteller at birth and you're deciding to figure out how to turn it into a messaging platform. Okay, that's terrific. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to make sure that I think what's really important today is the differentiation is one of the biggest things we're hearing here. So in terms of differentiation, you talked a little bit, Jackson, about competitive analysis. You talked about the process, Amanda, and how you want to make sure you're testing it, that sort of thing. Are there specific components that you think are really important to discuss or consider within a message differentiating platform? Like what might make you different or unique? And I'm kind of riffing here, but are there things that you might consider, such as a competitive advantage? You talked about defining the white space. How do you insert yourself with a particular piece of that messaging that might make you different?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, brands are all unique, even if they're, very similar in the same industry. Nike and Adidas are similar, but they have differentiated brands that you can all think of what those might be. It's tough. It can be tough to find differentiation, especially when it comes to language, because, a lot of times people or companies within the same industry are using similar language. But to me, it's like this idea of being authentic to your brand, having kind of a firm stance in what you believe and sticking to it. If people are familiar with your brand, they should not be surprised about what you're saying. Anyone who knows your brand should be able to recognize that your messaging aligns with that brand. And then for new audiences, you can find ways to be bold and to stand out a little bit. I like to say that boldness is kind of on a spectrum. You don't have to match the energy of like Nike or McDonald's or these brands that like are in our face all the time, but you can be a B2G company or a SaaS provider or something like that and still be bold, still find ways to inject emotion and storytelling into your messaging in the hopes of standing out.
No, that's awesome. And maybe we can segue to, how do you basically help your messaging remain relevant? I mean, over time, is there a point in time when you feel like you should be readdressing it? Is there, especially in today's landscape, sometimes is it bad to be changing your messaging all the time, or can you provide any commentary on that? I'm gonna go to you, Amanda.
Remaining relevant. Well, that's a great question. I think that's something that we think a lot about as writers in the age of AI. But I think looking to the future, we see very clear trends in even, for example, what Google's search algorithm is prioritizing, and that is authentic content, original content, as Jackson mentioned. And I think we're going to see moving forward that human storytellers, stories based in real life experiences, people's insights, creativity, and knowledge about the world, that world that is offline, for example. That's something that only humans can bring. So I think remaining relevant means keeping people part of the process, even though AI can do some things well. We may be in a phase where we're a little bit overeager to use it for everything. And I think we're going to see a little bit of a return to just people's voices and a flow of storytelling and narrative that follows, real arcs that storytellers have used for millennia, rather than kind of sentence by sentence. First this topic, AI is a bit like bullet points sometimes. So that's how I would remain relevant.
I think you touch on the AI topic. I could I could see people potentially in the audience saying, "Well, I'm just gonna throw this into Chat GPT and see what it comes out with, and will it develop a messaging platform for me?" What commentary might you suggest against that topic? I
Yeah,
know.
I think
Yeah.
that's dangerous. Jackson, what are your thoughts?
I think, yeah, I think there's some ways in which AI is very helpful. It's helped automate some of our processes. It's very helpful on our team when it comes to brainstorming if we want to think about topics for specific blog posts or content creation. But I find that the content that AI generates is very formulaic. It has certain patterns that are very identifiable. You don't even really need a trained eye to see um, what patterns emerge with the writing that it produces. And I do think too that that's going to be a stronger factor when things like Google search and SEO crawling, it'll be able to better identify what's AI and what's not, or what's AI generated and what's not. So I think a good rule of thumb, personally, I think writing done by humans is better anyway, but a good rule of thumb is to kind of use it wisely, use it to help inspire ideas, but really bringing that human ingenuity and creativity into the fold is going to result in richer content, stronger
Mhm.
content, and more effective content.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just underscore that by saying that the origin of the idea matters, right? Whether it comes from someone brainstorming on pen and paper or a group talking together, having the spark of an idea, or a phrase that is all resonating with them. There's something just irreplaceable about that. And I think somehow as a writer, your audience can maybe feel when the origin of writing or an idea came from a spark between people.
Mhm.
Maybe not, but I do think the origin of the ideas matters. And I would warn against using AI for something so important as a messaging platform, just because the ideas generated are just coming from kind of the entirety of information online. And you could have a phrase in there that's something that people don't say in everyday life, that's not conversational, and it actually is kind of awkward phrasing. And this
Mhm.
get past, many groups of people and make it out into the public sphere. Just because people kind of read quickly, they might overlook it, but you do not want to put that out there in public, something that's not conversational, doesn't even make sense as a phrase. But I've seen it happen. So we
Yeah,
just need to
sure.
be respectful of the technology, but also cautious.
No, I think that's an excellent point, and that kind of speaks to maybe the second question a little bit about how to reach a specific audience. I think you touched on this before, Jackson, about the messaging platform. We both touched on the messaging platform to the extent that it could be customized for each audience. Research is important in that. Can you share any insights as to how you might tweak a message into a particular audience, whether
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
or otherwise?
Sure. So like I was saying before, that upfront research is so important, and part of what we produce out of that are audience personas. So when we're speaking with internal stakeholders at an organization that we're working with, we'll ask them, who's your audience? Like, what are they like? What do they do? Where do you see them online? Are they on Facebook? Are they on Twitter? Are they on Instagram? Are they like young people on TikTok? It's like where can we meet them? So we need to know their behavioral trends and like their social trends, and then creating personas that have these real motivations and fears and frustrations and behavioral things. And so once we're able to like really define who that audience is, that's when we can slightly nuance the message. So I don't have a great example off the top of my head, but the way that, for REQ, how we would speak to a potential client versus internal audiences is going to be very different. To a client, we might speak about what the value we bring to them is, versus to our internal audiences, it would be, why you want to work here, what our values are internally that you might connect with. So just finding slight like nuances. Again, you're going to want to be saying similar things in a similar tone, but the actual content of what you're saying should be backed up by that research and really resonate with those specific personas.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it oftentimes the internal community is often overlooked from a messaging standpoint, but you do want to make sure that all internal audiences are communicating the same message to those specific audiences as they see fit, as you talked about with the buyer persona. Um, okay, so we talked about AI for a little bit. Let's talk about what kind of, I don't know, what kind of questions have you been seeing lately from clients? Amanda, let's maybe start with you. Are there specific clients that people are saying, I'm not sure how to address this or that? What are you seeing?
Well, we often get questions around, do I need a tagline? What should my headline be? I like these questions just because I think of messaging as this landscape where you can explore. You could maybe have one headline or tagline that you like, and maybe it needs to evolve in a couple of years. So I think it's less important what you call it, but rather whether your copy is making an impact and serving its purpose, right? And taglines, maybe it's not relevant to your organization to have one single line of copy that you're using all the time. It's okay to have many different powerful headlines that you're using. And then your favorite one could float to the surface, for example, but you don't have to call it a tagline.
That's really interesting. We do get that question a lot. Do we need to have a tagline? What is our tagline? What should our tagline be? No,
Take the pressure off.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And maybe the tagline can communicate a value proposition. That's one of the questions this here is like, how do we potentially create a specific value proposition? I do know that value proposition means different things to different people, but if you have any perspective on what a value proposition might look like, um, Jackson, is that something you could help us out with there?
Sure. I mean, yeah, value propositions are something that we obviously want to define as part of the messaging platform. It ties back to those goals and moonshots. So how can we, how can that organization be fulfilling those goals and delivering value to their customers or to their audiences? And yeah, we define them early on in the process because we like to keep them top of mind. but they're also like those are like kind of the unique things that make a brand differentiate. So we're going to have different value propositions from our most close competition, just because by nature we're slightly different and we're going to be slightly offering things in slightly different ways. So I think that those are often key to just helping differentiate.
Mm.
Very interesting. So do we have any questions that have come into the chat yet? I do see a question. Okay, hold on. Let me grab this question. Okay, from Nick. Thank you, Nick. With a small team and or limited budgets, how do you think AI can be used to at least help with building a messaging platform, maybe document framework, customer persona research, etc.? Where is the line drawn? That's a great question because
Yeah,
it sort of speaks to, yeah, like where do you start and where do you draw the line on the typical messaging platform?
sure. That's a great question. I think if we're able to create the framework, not the messaging platform as a framework, but like kind of the big idea behind what the brand is, what the tone and voice should be, and like how we want to message. AI is you can input some of those things and create messaging that actually is sort of an extension of what you already created yourself. So I think there's ways to nuance it. And again, once the AI does produce the messaging, it's good to double check it and read through it and make sure that it still sounds like something that your brand would say. But it all ties back to that upfront. If you're able to do that upfront research, like however you do produce the messaging, it's going to be sort of pressure checked to begin with, because it all ties back to who you are as an organization, who your audiences are, things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I like to use AI to help with research. Of
Mm,
course, you want to make sure to check all of the research to make sure that it's actually credible from a credible source. But and also AI can hallucinate. So getting that basic competitor research is really helpful for that, and maybe brainstorming. Ultimately, I think that a human can brainstorm with AI, but I think that we can still create equivalent copy when it comes to very short copy. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think you do run the risk that that words could be oversimplified or perhaps not really quite the right nuance, but there's still such value in what the human can interject from that standpoint. I've also seen people develop a framework and then kind of test it against AI. So
mm,
I think there are definitely ways to incorporate AI into the process, but certainly if you want an example of what a framework looks like, that could be determined pretty easily. But what goes into those boxes is what's sort of critical. So
Amanda's answer actually reminded me of another question that we do get frequently
yeah,
in some different ways from clients, is about the length of copy. And I remember back to, graduating college in like the infancy of social media kind of, and they were already telling us about attention spans, online attention spans are dwindling. And I think this is, I
yeah.
think it's only gotten worse, right? So to us, like it is often a challenge, but a unique challenge is like, how do we capture attention in such a short amount of space with, such limited character counts, or even on website copy? Like, how do we capture your attention with a bold headline? And then we can actually tell you the details once your attention's captured. But like, that is such a challenge, and there's no necessarily right answer, but again, ties down to just understanding who your audiences are and what you hope can resonate with them. But yeah, that the length of copy, I think across the board, we often say is like more concise copy is more engaging.
mm.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, I love that, Jackson. I love just constantly referring back to the audiences. It made me
Mhm.
think about the question about the value proposition and how to get there. I just think that like AI can help you kind of brainstorm a value proposition, but I mean, I just love going back to your audience, to the people, and really understanding how did this change their lives, their experience out in the world, because ultimately your value prop, your messaging, it needs to make sense in the world today. And human beings are the ones out there walking around having experiences, getting memories, interacting with each other, not AI. There's going to be a lag time. So if you really want to be on the cutting edge, go straight to your audience. Make sure you're talking to those people.
Very true. Okay, I think there might have been one more question. Is there one more question in here? Yes, okay. The question, how do you start the process? Where is a good place to begin updating your brand messaging? So where do you start? And maybe it even begins beyond, even before a brand is developed. Like, how does that parlay into it? What's a good place to begin in updating your brand messaging? Who wants to take that one?
I'll have to think about that for a second.
Yeah, please do. I mean,
Yeah, I would say testing.
It's a really, really good question because
Yeah.
I think you have to take a step back, right? Getting started means testing messaging you may already have. It means making that framework. As Jackson mentioned, we do lay a foundation. We have the certain elements of a messaging platform that we use, but that doesn't mean that you have to use the exact same ones, right? We have our value propositions, the mission, the vision, audience messaging if we need that. So just decide what you need for your purposes that makes sense for your brand, your organization, nonprofit. What do you need that's going to be really actionable and get the results that you're going towards? You don't need a social media bio description if you're not on social media. You don't need a press release boilerplate if you're not going to be releasing those, for example.
yeah.
Think about what you need and then go from there and talk to your most passionate team members. Go to them, the people who believe in the technology, the people who are just super enthused about your offering, and ask them, how is this changing the world?
Yeah, the last part, first of all, that was awesome ending there with that, because I was going to speak about some of what you said there at the end. Like, it's all, to me, it ties back to having those human conversations and talking to people. And the brands, I think, are most effective with messaging and having, a strong presence in the space, or like ones that really raise their people up. It's not always just about leadership. It can be, an intern who brings a good idea to the table, or whoever it might be that might just be passionate about the way that they think about the world and where your brand's place in that world is. So just, I think, gathering as many unique perspectives internally as you can and starting to distill where those thematic those themes come about is just like really sort of gets you pinpointing where your messaging should be going, or what are some topics that you should really be focusing on.
I totally agree, and I'm gonna totally call you two out because you just went through this exercise with me personally, and you went through see, I wasn't supposed to bring this up, but you went through this exercise where you talked to people in the team, and it really made a difference because we got a lot of really good insight back from people that are very passionate about the company, and that's the beginning of a framework. So I guess you could say that we're the cobbler who's actually fixing the kids' shoes.
Yeah.
How's that for impromptu? All right, well, we're nearing the end of our time. Any other questions? Need to check real quick. I'm not sure that there are. So if not, we will probably go ahead and end early, but I do want to share a couple other housekeeping items. We are going to be having this video available on YouTube after we send a recording. We'll probably have a blog post. Please help share the content if you found it valuable. We always like to hear feedback from you so that we can put together some better programs for you in the future. So thanks to everybody. We're giving you a few minutes back in your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.